Usually when we talk about a massive global brand, there's this expectation of pristine engineering right from day one.
Oh, for sure. Like everything was perfectly planned.
Exactly. I mean, picture walking into one of those high-end retail stores today. You see that iconic logo. The lighting is just, well, it's absolutely perfect.
Right. And the shoes are displayed on those minimalist pedestals, like modern art in a glass case.
Yeah, like art. And the whole environment just projects this aura of absolute inevitability. Looks clean, flawless, comforting.
We really love to buy into that myth, don't we? The idea that world-changing success is just a tidy, step-by-step master plan.
Right, drawn up by some genius in a boardroom.
Yeah.
But when you step into the actual origin story of Nike, that pristine glass case completely shatters.
It really does. It shatters into a million pieces.
You realize the foundation isn't made of polished marble at all. It's made of mud, sweat, terrifying risks, and just a shocking amount of chaos.
The contrast between the brand's current monolithic status and its desperate beginnings is, well, it's staggering.
It's wild. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're here with us. We have a monumental story to unpack today, anchored by Shoe Dog.
Yeah, the profoundly candid memoir by Nike co-founder Phil Knight.
But we aren't just reading a book together today. We are pulling from a massive stack of sources to look at this journey from every possible angle.
Right. We've got direct excerpts from Knight's narrative, plus some really fascinating academic analyses of his highly unusual leadership style.
Very unusual.
Yeah.
And a really revealing review by Bill Gates that cuts right to the heart of why this story matters for you.
To understand the mechanics of the survival we just mentioned, we're also bringing in comprehensive study guides from lit charts, super summary, and reading graphics.
And we paired those with some razor-sharp business strategy breakdowns from Lightspeed and Prime Revenue. Because our mission today is to look right past that $30 billion corporate behemoth.
We want to uncover the messy, chaotic, and terrifyingly fragile journey of its founding.
Because this isn't just a business history. It's a psychological blueprint for navigating life's crazy ideas.
Bill Gates actually provided the perfect framing for this in his review. He pointed out that the vast majority of business books paint a completely false, sanitized picture of success.
Oh yeah, we all know the standard formula, right? A sharp entrepreneur gets a brilliant idea, drafts an ironclad strategy,
Hires a flawless team.
right, and then just executes a frictionless rocket ride to wealth and fame.
Exactly. But Gates notes that Knight's narrative actively destroys that myth. The story of Nike involves near bankruptcy, bitter betrayals, federal lawsuits that could have ended everything.
And a ragtag island of misfits who, against all rational odds, somehow changed the world.
Let's jump right into the starting blocks. The year is 1962.
Okay, picture Phil Knight. He is 24 years old, and he is sleeping in his childhood bedroom in his parents' house in Portland, Oregon.
On paper, his resume looks like the American dream. I mean, he has an undergraduate degree from the University of Oregon, an MBA from Stanford, and he served his mandatory time in the Army.
By all conventional metrics of the early 1960s, he is a respectable adult ready to climb the corporate ladder.
But internally, he admits he feels like a shy, pale kid. He hasn't really experienced life. He hasn't broken any rules.
And the thought of just settling into a quiet, respectable accounting job fills him with a quiet dread. So to clear his head, he does what he loves most. He goes for a foggy morning run.
That physical act of running is the foundational philosophy of the entire company. Knight describes a very specific, almost transcendent awakening that happens on a run.
Yeah, there is a moment when the mind clears, right? The physical exertion takes over and the anxieties of the world just melt away.
Right. And during the specific run, he has an epiphany that will dictate the rest of his life. He realizes he doesn't just want a job, a mortgage, and a polite existence.
He wants his life to be play. He zeroes in on that incredibly specific, exuberant half second right before winning and losing are decided in a race.
It's that pulsing moment of pure potential and ultimate effort. He decides he wants that feeling to be his daily existence.
I find that definition of happiness so compelling. It's not about standing on the podium with the gold medal. It's about the breathless tension of the race itself.
So he dusts off this concept he's been obsessed with. He calls it his crazy idea.
He had actually written a paper about it while getting his MBA at Stanford. The premise was audacious, but logically sound.
At the time, the athletic shoe market was completely dominated by German brands, primarily Adidas and Puma.
Right. Knight wanted to import high-quality, low-cost Japanese running shoes to the United States to compete directly with them.
And he based this theory on a massive market shift that had just happened in a completely different industry. Japanese cameras like Nikon and Canon had recently overtaken the dominant German cameras like Leica in the US market.
He thought, well, why could the same thing happen with running shoes?
The psychological approach to this idea is brilliantly captured in the epigraph Knight chose for his book. It's a quote from the Zen master Shinryu Suzuki.
Oh, I love this quote.
Yeah, it says, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few."
Knight had absolutely no expertise in the shoe industry. He didn't know how to manufacture a shoe. He didn't know international import laws.
I had no retail experience, but that lack of expertise was his greatest asset.
An industry expert would have instantly seen 100 reasons why trying to unseat Adidas with an unknown Japanese brand was impossible.
Right, Knight only saw the possibility. He viewed life as a race without a finish line, where the act of running itself is the destination.
Okay, so imagine you are Knight in this moment. You have this massive, world-changing idea burning a hole in your brain, but you have zero capital.
Zero. He needs a $50 loan to order the first batch of sample shoes from Japan.
But he also wants funding for a trip around the world, a massive backpacking adventure to see the globe before he heads to Japan to pitch his idea.
To get the money, he has to pitch his father. The scene he sets is so perfectly mid-century America.
It really is. He approaches his dad, who is sitting in his vinyl recliner in the living room, completely absorbed in watching his favorite Western TV shows, Wagon Train and Rawhide.
It is the ultimate clash of generations. His father was the publisher of the Oregon Journal. He was a man who worshipped at the altar of respectability. He valued order, predictability, and safety.
Let me stop you there, because when I read this part of the sources, my modern brain had a hard time grasping the stakes.
How so?
Today, if a 24-year-old Stanford grad says, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to take a gap year, backpack through Europe and Asia, and try to start a direct-to-consumer brand," the parents would probably just ask for their Instagram handle to follow the journey.
Oh, absolutely. It's practically a cliche now.
Right. So why was this such a terrifying, monumental ask for Knight in 1962?
We have to completely remove our modern lens to understand the gravity of this moment. The world of 1962 felt infinitely larger and far more closed off.
Right.
Commercial air travel was not a casual experience. 90% of Americans had never even been on an airplane.
Wow, 90%.
Yeah, the vast majority of people never ventured more than 100 miles from the town they were born in.
So for a respectable young man from the affluent neighborhood of Eastmoreland to abandon a guaranteed corporate trajectory to backpack around the globe,
that was considered incredibly reckless. It was something Beatniks did, not Stanford MBAs.
and the destination itself was a massive point of friction, especially with his grandmother, right?
Exactly. While his father surprisingly agrees to fund the trip, perhaps harboring a secret regret about his own lack of youthful adventure Knight's grandmother, whom they call Mom Hatfield, is genuinely horrified.
Because of the war.
You have to remember the timeline. This is 1962. The end of World War II was only 17 years prior.
Right. Japan was not viewed as a friendly trade partner. It was viewed by the older generation as a brutal, sworn enemy.
She vividly remembered Pearl Harbor and the intense, visceral anti-Japanese sentiment that dominated the 1940s.
Knight himself recalls his very first airplane ride as a child, where he nervously asked his dad if the Japanese were going to shoot them down out of the sky.
So, Knight heading to Japan to do business wasn't just unconventional. To his family, it felt physically dangerous and borderline unpatriotic.
That context changes everything. He's asking to go to a place his own grandmother thinks might literally kill him.
Yeah, but he gets the blessing, he gets the money, and he sets off with his Stanford buddy, Carter.
Before they ever reach Japan, though, they take a massive detour in Hawaii.
And honestly, looking at the Pacific Ocean and the surf, you can't really blame them.
No, not at all. They decide to pause the grand plan. They rent this miserable, cheap apartment where Knight literally sleeps on an ironing board.
An ironing board.
Right. And they get jobs just to pay the rent so they can keep surfing. And this is where we get a masterclass in the psychology of sales. Knight tries to get a job selling encyclopedias door to door.
It goes spectacularly, disastrously wrong.
It is a complete flop. Knight is cripplingly shy. The act of knocking on a stranger's door, interrupting their dinner, and launching into a rehearsed pitch feels like torture to him.
And the constant rejection, the door slamming in his face day after day, absolutely shatters his confidence. He makes virtually zero money.
So, out of sheer desperation to make rent, he pivots. He answers a want ad for a completely different kind of sales job.
Right. He ends up selling mutual funds, specifically Dreyfus funds, in a literal boiler room run by a notorious financial figure named Bernard Kornfeld.
The contrast here is fascinating. You have this quiet, introverted kid thrown into a chaotic room full of aggressive, wolfish young men who are aggressively crashing the phones, trying to extract money from strangers.
And yet, in this high-pressure environment, Knight suddenly thrives. He is incredibly successful. Within a week, he makes enough in commissions to pay his rent for 6 months.
It seems completely counterintuitive. If he's paralyzed by the rejection of selling encyclopedias, how is he suddenly a killer closer in a Wall Street-style boiler room?
The secret lies in the nature of the product and his relationship to it. Encyclopedias felt like a hustle.
He was relying on a forced pitch, trying to convince people they needed something they didn't.
Right. It required a performative extroversion he simply didn't possess. But the mutual funds were different. They relied on hard numbers, historical data, and objective truth.
Knight understood the math. He believed the funds were a genuinely smart investment.
He didn't have to put on a fake persona. He just had to explain the reality of the numbers to the people on the other end of the phone. His quiet authenticity became his greatest sales tool.
That is such a vital insight for anyone listening who feels like they have to change their personality to succeed. You don't.
No, Knight realized that you simply cannot force a fit. He learned that he could only sell what he inherently believed in.
If the belief is genuine, the sales pitch isn't a pitch at all. It's just sharing the truth.
Exactly. So he has this revelation, he makes his money, but the crazy idea is still calling.
Right. Carter decides to stay in Hawaii. He met a girl, the surfing is good, but Knight knows he has to finish the mission.
He flies to Japan alone. He is terrified. He's sweating through his suit on the plane, looking out the window at the red sun emblem on the wing, remembering all those childhood fears of the war.
But he lands, he navigates the culture shock, and he manages to secure a meeting with the executives at Onitsuka Tiger, a prominent shoe manufacturer.
What unfolds in that boardroom in Kobe, Japan, is one of the most legendary high-stakes bluffs in the history of business.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Knight is a 24-year-old kid with $50 to his name.
And he is sitting across a massive conference table from a group of seasoned, formidable Japanese executives.
They are intrigued by this American, and they ask him a very basic, reasonable question. Mr. Knight, what company do you represent?
And he has absolutely nothing. No company, no LLC, no office, no employees.
It's the equivalent of showing up to a heavyweight championship boxing match, having never thrown a punch in your life, slipping on the gloves, and trying to convince the referee, the crowd, and your opponent that you are the reigning champion.
He has to invent reality on the spot.
So what does he do? His mind races back across the Pacific to his childhood bedroom in Portland.
He pictures his wall covered in his old track and field ribbons.
And he just looks the executives in the eye and invents a name out of thin air. Blue Ribbon Sports.
It is an act of sheer audacity, born entirely of desperation.
But remember the lesson from Hawaii.
Right, because Knight speaks with an absolute cellular conviction about the massive untapped potential of the U.S. running market. The executives don't see a nervous kid making things up.
They see a passionate American distributor. Onitsuka buys the bluff.
They agree to send him sample shoes and officially grant Blue Ribbon Sports the distribution rights for the Western United States.
He pulls it off. He flies home, waits agonizing months for the sample shoes to actually arrive, and then he starts his business.
And how does he do it? He isn't renting out prime retail space.
No, he is driving to local track meets across the Pacific Northwest in his green Plymouth Valiant, popping the trunk and selling shoes directly to runners.
As the demand grows, he needs help. And this is where we get to the fascinating cast of characters that built this company.
The sources finally refer to them as an island of misfit toys. Knight didn't go to headhunters to find polished MBA graduates.
He hired people with a very specific, obsessive, quirky energy. Let's break down this early roster.
Okay, let's start with the most critical early hire.
That would be Jeff Johnson, employee number 1. Johnson is the antithesis of a corporate drone.
He is a relentless, deeply passionate runner who becomes an obsessive salesman.
Right. Long before anyone had heard of CRM software or digital data tracking, Johnson was building these massive, meticulously detailed index card databases of every single customer.
He knew their shoe sizes, their personal best times, their injuries. He eventually opens their very first physical retail store in Los Angeles.
But the psychological dynamic between Johnson and Knight is incredibly telling. Johnson is desperate for connection and validation.
He writes Knight constant, voluminous letters, pouring out his ideas, seeking encouragement, and asking for direction.
And Knight's response to these impassioned letters, he basically ignores them.
Almost entirely. Knight's silence is absolutely maddening to Johnson.
But there is a paradoxical effect. Because Knight refuses to micromanage or even validate him, Johnson is forced to become entirely self-reliant.
He channels his frustration into working even harder, figuring out the retail strategies completely on his own.
Then you have Bill Bowerman. Now, Bowerman was Knight's former track coach at the University of Oregon.
Tonight, Bowerman isn't just a business partner. He is a mythical, intimidating father figure.
Bowerman is completely uninterested in the financials or the sales. He is a mad scientist of track and field.
He is obsessed with shaving ounces off the weight of a shoe.
Yeah.
He is constantly ripping apart the Onitsuka shoes, modifying them, and sending notes back to Japan on how to improve the engineering.
Later on, he famously ruins his wife's waffle iron by pouring liquid rubber into it just to see if the grid pattern would make a good traction sole.
Which, of course, becomes the legendary waffle trainer.
Adding to this eclectic mix, you have Bob Woodall. Woodall was a former standout track star who was tragically paralyzed in an accident and is confined to a wheelchair.
Where Bowerman is the innovator and Johnson is the sales engine, Woodall becomes the operational heart of Blue Ribbon.
He is the ultimate level-headed problem solver. And finally, you have Hayes, an overweight, brilliant accountant who brings a desperately needed sense of financial rigor to their chaotic, exploding growth.
Let me jump in here, because when I look at this group, this island of misfit toys, and I look at how Knight dealt with them, I have a major question.
Go for it.
The academic source we reviewed, Brian N. Faith's analysis applying the Kouzes and Posner leadership framework, explicitly states that Knight modeled his management style after General George S. Patton.
Yes. The guiding quote is, "Don't tell people how to do things, tell them what to do, and let them surprise you with their results."
Now, that sounds great on a motivational poster, but looking at how he ignored Jeff Johnson's letters and left everyone to their own devices,
Right.
Was Knight actually a brilliant visionary leader? Or was he just a completely absentee boss who got phenomenally lucky that he accidentally hired a bunch of obsessive workaholics?
That is the central tension of Knight's entire leadership narrative, and it's a highly valid critique.
Because it sounds a bit like he was just avoiding managing them.
If you evaluate Knight by modern human resources standards, he was a terrible manager. He actively withheld praise, he was physically absent for long stretches, and he provided almost zero tactical guidance to his team.
So how does the academic framework explain his success then?
Faith's analysis resolves this contradiction by focusing on one specific pillar of leadership where Knight was undeniably world-class, inspiring a shared vision.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
Knight didn't hire people who needed to be told how to do their jobs. He hired flawed, quirky individuals who fundamentally viewed themselves as scrappy underdogs.
So he didn't give them a roadmap, he gave them a crusade.
Precisely. He united them against shared external enemies. In the beginning, the monolithic enemy was Adidas.
They viewed German corporate dominance as something to be toppled.
Later, the enemy became the conservative banks and eventually the federal government.
So Knight's radically hands-off approach worked specifically because he had cultivated a culture of absolute religious belief in what they were doing.
If he had hired conventional ladder-climbing corporate executives, the lack of structure would have caused the company to collapse in a month.
But he hired misfits who desperately needed the freedom to be obsessive.
They weren't selling footwear. They were spreading the gospel of running.
Okay, so the vision is locked in, the misfit team is assembled, and the sales are absolutely exploding.
Blue Ribbon is experiencing 100% year-over-year growth.
They go from selling $8,000 worth of shoes in 1964 to a staggering $150,000 in 1968.
If you look at those revenue charts, you'd assume they were popping champagne in penthouses.
But the reality is they are constantly, terrifyingly dead broke.
This brings us to perhaps the most visceral, stomach-churning business lesson in the entire Shoe Dog narrative.
Our strategic sources from Lightspeed and Prime Revenue really drill down into the mechanics of this crisis.
Blue Ribbon was surviving by living on the float.
Right, because Knight had virtually zero equity, no massive pool of savings or investor capital. Every single cent of profit from a shoe sale was immediately plowed back into ordering the next, progressively larger shipment of shoes from Japan.
I really want to make sure we understand the mechanics of this because we throw around terms like cash flow so casually.
Living on the float isn't a spreadsheet error. It is a physical, heart-pounding, high-wire act.
Imagine juggling flaming chainsaws. Living on the float means you are writing a massive check to your Japanese manufacturer on Tuesday, knowing full well your bank account is practically empty.
You are betting your entire life that the shoes will clear customs by Wednesday, your salesman will sell them by Thursday, and the cash receipts will clear the bank by Friday morning, just hours before the manufacturer's check is cashed.
If a ship gets delayed in a storm or a dock worker goes on strike, the check bounces, the chainsaws fall, and the entire company instantly dies.
That chainsaw analogy perfectly captures the sheer terror of their daily operations.
And from a traditional banking perspective, this model is a complete nightmare.
Prime Revenue's analysis points out the extreme existential danger of relying on a single commercial bank for funding.
The conservative bankers in Oregon didn't look at Blue Ribbon's hypergrowth and see an amazing success story.
They looked at the zero cash reserves and saw a massive, unacceptable risk.
They didn't care that the shoes were selling out. They cared that Knight had no safety net.
The bankers were constantly breathing down Knight's neck, routinely threatening to pull the plug on his credit line, demanding that he stop ordering so much inventory, slow his growth, and build up a respectable cash reserve.
But Knight refuses. He is completely possessed by this singular philosophy, grow or die.
If he taps the brakes to appease the bankers, he loses his momentum and the big brands crush him.
And to make this high-wire act even more chaotic, while he is fighting a war with his own bankers, he's got external competitors actively trying to cut his throat.
Oh, right. There is an East Coast distributor that Knight refers to as the Marlboro Man.
Why the Marlboro Man?
Because the guy literally used to be a model in cigarette advertisements. He's slick, he's wealthy, and he decides he wants the U.S. market.
He flies to Japan and actively tries to steal the Onitsuka distribution rights right out from under Knight's nose.
This is a pivotal moment that hardens Knight's business philosophy. He realizes that business isn't a gentleman's game. It is, in his words, a war without bullets.
He doesn't just send an angry telegram to Onitsuka or complain about fairness.
He immediately drops everything, gets on a plane, flies to Japan, walks into the Onitsuka offices, and completely outmaneuvers the Marlboro Man.
He leverages the sales data, his deep belief in the product, and his existing relationships to secure a crucial ironclad 3-year exclusive deal for the entire United States market.
It's a moment where he proves to his Japanese partners and to himself that he has the grit for a street fight.
And here's the detail that truly broke my brain while reading these sources.
What's that?
While he is managing this rapidly growing, high-stakes international importing business, while he is battling conservative bankers and out-hustling slick East Coast rivals, he is also working a full-time day job.
Because Blue Ribbon isn't paying him a salary.
Exactly. He has to take a job as a corporate accountant at Price Waterhouse and later as an accounting professor at Portland State University, just so he can pay his own personal rent and buy groceries.
Which introduces one of the most profound and sobering thematic tensions in the memoir: the brutal cost of greatness on family life.
While he is teaching accounting at Portland State, he meets a bright, capable student named Benny.
They fall in love, they get married, and they start a family, welcoming 2 sons.
But the toll of his absolute devotion to Blue Ribbon becomes starkly evident.
Knight loves Penny, and he loves his boys, but the business is an all-consuming fire.
Every single day brings 50 new existential problems that threaten to bankrupt them.
The sheer amount of mental bandwidth and physical time required to keep the chainsaws in the air meant that he was often physically absent or mentally checked out when he was at home.
It's a very honest look at the sacrifice required to build an empire. You simply cannot do it while maintaining perfect work-life balance.
It's a harsh reality. You don't build a $30 billion global behemoth by working 9 to 5 and completely unplugging on the weekends.
So we move into the early 1970s. The hard-fought 3-year exclusive deal with Onitsuka is ticking down.
And Knight starts noticing that the relationship is getting incredibly frosty.
The shipments from Japan are suddenly arriving late. When they do arrive, the sizing is completely wrong for the American market.
Knight has this terrible gut feeling that something is deeply wrong behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He actually plants a spy inside Onitsuka's corporate offices.
It is a completely unorthodox, incredibly risky move, but it ultimately saves the company from annihilation.
The spy manages to get a look at the internal files and discovers that a man named Kitami, Onitsuka's aggressive new export manager, is actively flying to the U.S. and secretly interviewing other American distributors to replace Blue Ribbon.
Despite all the success Knight has brought them, Onitsuka is planning a massive betrayal.
Knight is completely cornered. If Onitsuka cuts him off and refuses to ship him shoes, he has zero inventory.
The company dies overnight. The float crashes.
He realizes instantly that he needs a contingency plan, and he needs it yesterday.
The only way to survive is to stop being a middleman. He needs to manufacture his own brand of shoes, completely independent of Onitsuka.
He frantically scrambles to find independent factories in Mexico and later back in Japan that possess the technical capability to manufacture running shoes to Bill Bowerman's exacting specifications.
But manufacturing the physical shoe is only half the battle. A new shoe needs a new identity.
It needs a logo that can stand out on a track, and it needs a brand name.
This might be my favorite part of the entire origin story because it beautifully highlights how incredibly accidental history can be.
Oh, the logo story is amazing. He needs a logo immediately for the factory to start production.
He remembers a graphic design student he had met in the halls of Portland State named Carolyn Davidson.
He calls her in and pays her a grand total of $35 to design a stripe for the side of the shoe.
$35?
$35. She comes back with a few sketches, including the curved check mark we now know as the swoosh.
Knight looks at what will become the most recognized corporate logo in modern human history, and his reaction is incredibly underwhelming.
He basically shrugs and says, "It'll have to do."
It is hilarious in hindsight. But as the Litchart study guide explores, the symbol itself is actually a masterstroke of design.
Davidson specifically designed the swoosh to represent motion, forward energy, and the literal whoosh of air a runner leaves in their wake.
It is dynamic and fluid, which stood in stark contrast to the heavy, static stripes of their German competitors.
Okay, so they have the $35 swoosh. Now they desperately need a name, and they are up against a brutal factory deadline.
If they don't give the factory a name, the shoes don't get made.
Knight, the man we've established as the visionary leader, wants to call the new company Dimension 6.
Dimension 6, it is a terribly clunky, almost sci-fi sounding name that completely misses the ethos of running.
It's awful, and his employees know it. They actively revolt against him.
They're frantically throwing out alternative names like Bengal and Falcon.
Finally, Jeff Johnson, the obsessive employee number one, calls Knight and claims he just woke up from a vivid dream where the word Nike, the name of the winged Greek goddess of victory, came to him.
Knight actually hates all the options on the table, but the factory is demanding an answer.
He reluctantly chooses Nike, and his reaction to the name, maybe it will grow on us.
It completely shatters the illusion we talked about at the beginning of our dive today.
The grand, inevitable brand identity of Nike was not born in a brilliant boardroom strategy session. It was born out of last-minute panic, compromise, and tepid acceptance.
So the year is 1972. They have the shoes. They debut the very first Nike models at the massive Chicago Sporting Goods Show, and critically, they bring them to the U.S. Olympic trials in Eugene, Oregon.
They pack the shoes in these obnoxiously bright orange boxes so they stand out in the bleachers.
The shoes are an absolute hit. The runners love them, but of course, the secret is out. Onitsuka finds out about the independent brand.
Kitami is absolutely furious. He officially terminates Blue Ribbon's distribution contract and immediately sues them in Japan for breach of contract, attempting to crush the infant company before it can walk.
But Knight has learned how to fight. He doesn't fold. He countersues Onitsuka right back in the United States courts.
To fight the corporate giant, he hires his cousin, Hauser, a sharp, aggressive lawyer, to represent him.
Because Knight has no cash, Hauser agrees to take the case on a contingency basis, meaning he only gets paid if they win.
The trial becomes a brutal battle of narratives. Onitsuka claims that Knight maliciously plotted behind their back to steal their market share.
But Knight and Hauser flip the script. What was their brilliant legal counterargument?
They focus entirely on the timeline of betrayal. Knight argues, and produces evidence, that Onitsuka broke the exclusivity agreement first when Kitami secretly began shopping for other American distributors.
Knight's creation of Nike wasn't a malicious plot. It was a desperate, legally justified act of self-defense after Onitsuka shattered the contract.
The entire fate of the company comes down to a ruling by a federal judge, James Burns.
And the judge looks at the evidence and rules decisively in Nike's favor.
He awards Knight money damages for the breach of contract, and crucially, he allows them to keep the trademark names of the shoe models they had co-developed.
It is their Independence Day. The umbilical cord to Japan is cut. Nike is finally truly free.
They are free from Onitsuka, yes, but they are incredibly far from safe.
This brings us into the mid to late 1970s. Nike, as an independent brand, is growing at an exponential rate. But that old ghost, The terrifying reality of cash flow and living on the float is still haunting every single decision.
And in 1975, they hit a brick wall that almost ends the entire story.
The 1975 crisis. Picture this. Nike currently owes their bank $1 million to cover their massive manufacturing orders.
Suddenly, the Bank of California just snaps. They have had enough of the High Wire Act.
Without warning, they freeze all of Nike's accounts. They completely cut off the line of credit.
And worst of all, they alert the FBI, suspecting that Knight must be committing some kind of financial fraud because he's been pushing the float so aggressively.
The immediate reality is devastating. Nike cannot make payroll. They cannot pay their factory bills. They are literally days away from vanishing into thin air.
This is exactly where Prime Revenue's analysis of alternative funding and risk management becomes critical.
If Knight had only relied on that one American bank, the story of Nike would have ended in 1975.
But Knight had spent years quietly cultivating a deep, respectful relationship with a massive Japanese trading company called Nisho.
When the Bank of California pulled the plug and effectively sentenced Nike to death, Knight didn't try to bluff.
He went straight to Nisho and laid every single card on the table. He told them the absolute terrifying truth about their precarious financial situation.
And Nisho's response is fascinating. They don't just panic, they send in their own forensic auditors.
The auditors comb through Nike's chaotic books, and they see something that the conservative American bankers completely missed.
They don't just look at the empty cash reserves, they look at the underlying demand.
They see that every single time Nike makes a shoe, a runner buys it instantly. The potential is undeniable.
Nisho looks at the reality of the market and realizes that the problem isn't the product. The problem is simply the mechanism of financing the hypergrowth.
So Nisho makes an incredible move. They step in, march down to the Bank of California, and pay off the entire $1 million debt in full on Nike's behalf.
They become the ultimate financial savior. The massive takeaway here is the power of transparency.
By telling Nisho the unvarnished, ugly truth in his darkest hour, Knight earned a level of trust that a slick corporate presentation could never achieve.
It's a phenomenal lesson in relationship capital, so they survive the bank crisis.
Now, around this same time in the mid-70s, Nike is desperately trying to figure out its soul.
They have the shoes, but who are they as an independent brand?
They find their entire identity embodied in one young, spectacular track star from Oregon named Steve Prefontaine. Everyone just calls him Pre.
Prefontaine was an absolute phenomenon. He wasn't just fast, he was a cultural force.
He was rebellious, courageous, and possessed this undeniable rock star swagger.
But what made him special was his philosophy of running. He ran every single race from the front, with total punishing, exhausting effort.
He famously said he didn't just want to win the race, he wanted to see who could endure the most pain.
Knight looks at Prefontaine and has a profound realization. That guy is Nike.
Prefontaine becomes the brand's true North Star. He perfectly embodies that exuberant concept of play and ultimate effort that Knight had visualized on that foggy run back in 1962.
Pre was the soul of the company. But then, unthinkable tragedy strikes.
In 1975, at the absolute height of his fame, Prefontaine is killed in a horrific car crash. He is only 24 years old.
It is a devastating blow. It shakes the entire company to its absolute core.
They didn't just lose their primary celebrity endorser. They lost their icon, their close friend, and the living embodiment of the brand they were trying to build.
It's a moment where a lot of companies would have just folded from the grief.
But the island of misfit toys survives the only way they know how, by burying themselves in relentless, almost obsessive product innovation.
Out of this dark period, Bill Bowerman finally perfects that waffle trainer design, which completely revolutionizes running traction and becomes a massive bestseller.
And then, in 1977, the future walks through the door. An eccentric former aerospace engineer named Frank Rudy walks into Knight's office.
He has a crazy idea of his own. He wants to inject pressurized gas into polyurethane bags and place them inside the midsole of a shoe for permanent cushioning.
Knight actually takes a prototype shoe, goes for a run, feels the unbelievable bounce, and signs a contract with Rudy that very same night.
That weird space-age technology, of course, becomes Nike Air, leading to hundreds of millions of shoes sold.
They literally innovate their way out of their collective grief and massive debt.
But in the world of Shoe Dog, the external threats never actually stop.
Just as they're getting their financial footing with the waffle trainer and Nike Air, They face what we might call the final boss of the narrative.
Oh man, the U.S. Customs battle. This legal nightmare spans from 1977 to 1979.
Out of nowhere, Nike gets an official letter from the federal government. The U.S. Customs Service states that Nike owes $25 million in retroactive import duties.
$25 million. It is an astronomical sum that would instantly, permanently bankrupt them.
The mechanism behind this massive bill is deeply cynical and frankly infuriating. We need to explain exactly how this happened.
Nike's massive American competitors, companies like Converse and Keds, were feeling the heat of Nike's explosive growth.
They couldn't beat Nike on the track, so they turned to the government.
They aggressively lobbied Washington to dust off and enforce a highly obscure, archaic law called the American Selling Price, or ASP.
Okay, break down the ASP for us, because this is wild. If I manufacture a shoe in Taiwan for $5, normal customs laws say I pay a tariff based on that $5 cost, right?
Exactly. Under normal laws, you pay a percentage of your manufacturing cost. But the ASP was a protectionist tariff designed for a completely different era of trade.
So how did they use it against Nike?
Under the ASP, the government doesn't tax you on what it cost you to make the shoe. They look at a domestic competitor, say Converse, and they find a quote-unquote similar shoe.
Okay, so if Converse sells their shoe for $20,
under the ASP, the government taxes Nike based on Converse's $20 retail price, not Nike's $5 manufacturing cost.
it is a completely rigged game. It allows your competitors to artificially dictate and massively inflate your tax burden just by raising their own prices.
It is the ultimate war without bullets operating at the highest federal level.
And Knight, true to form, absolutely refuses to just roll over and declare bankruptcy. He treats this like a war.
For years, he exhausts himself commuting back and forth from Oregon to Washington, D.C.
He hires high-powered lawyers, he lobbies politicians, and he fights this bureaucratic nightmare tooth and nail.
Eventually, through sheer exhaustion and legal maneuvering, he manages to negotiate a settlement, paying $9 million instead of $25.
It is a massive, painful check to write, but it finally clears the slate.
And that cleared slate sets the stage for the final act.
Knight has survived the banks, he survived Onitsuka, he survived the government.
But he realizes he cannot do this forever. The only way to permanently cure the cash flow nightmare, to stop juggling the chainsaws and living on the edge of the blade, is to finally take the company public and raise permanent capital.
But the internal reaction to the idea of an IPO is fascinating. The team is utterly terrified.
They have spent almost 2 decades building this weird, insular, fiercely independent misfit culture.
They are convinced that going public, bringing in thousands of Wall Street shareholders who only care about quarterly dividends, will absolutely spoil the culture.
They fear they will become the exact kind of sterile corporate entity they set out to destroy in 1962.
It's a completely valid fear. Going public often destroys the soul of a startup. So how do they protect themselves? How did they get the Wall Street money without losing their souls?
To mitigate this existential risk, they use a brilliant structural move during the initial public offering. They create 2 distinct classes of stock.
They issue Class B shares to the general public. These shares provide the financial equity. They allow people to invest and make money, but they carry very limited voting rights.
Meanwhile, the founders retain the Class A shares. The Class A shares hold the immense voting power.
This structure ensures that while the public provides the capital to fix the cash flow, Phil Knight and his trusted inner circle retain absolute, unshakable control over the board of directors and the creative direction of the company.
It is the ultimate having your cake and eating it too maneuver.
So in December of 1980, Nike officially goes public, and the wealth creation is staggering.
Overnight, Phil Knight, the kid who was too shy to sell encyclopedias and started out hawking shoes from the trunk of a Plymouth Valiant, is suddenly worth $178 million.
But the true emotional climax of the IPO isn't Knight's net worth. It's how the event rewards the early believers who risked everything.
Take Bob Whittle, the paralyzed problem solver. Years earlier, when the company was absolutely desperate for cash, Whittle's working-class parents gave Knight a $7,000 loan from their life savings.
At the 1980 IPO, that initial $7,000 lifeline is converted into stock worth $1.8 million.
And we cannot forget Carolyn Davidson, the graphic design student who designed the swoosh for $35.
Knight didn't forget her. After the IPO, he throws a surprise party for her. He gives her a custom gold ring shaped like the swoosh with a diamond in it.
And incredibly, he hands her an envelope containing 500 shares of Nike stock.
She holds onto that stock, and it eventually grows to be worth over $1 million.
That very same year, 1980, as if the IPO wasn't enough, Nike achieves another massive historic milestone.
Because of Knight's early, respectful dealings in Asia, Nike becomes the very first American shoemaker in 25 years to be granted permission to do business in China.
They secure a massive contract to outfit the entire Chinese Olympic track and field team.
In less than 2 decades, they transition from a scrappy Oregon startup to a true, undeniable global powerhouse.
Okay, we have tracked this incredible, sprawling journey from that foggy morning run in 1962 all the way to ringing the bell on Wall Street in 1980.
We've dissected the academic reviews, the financial analyses of the float, the legal maneuvers. Let's distill all of this down. What are the ultimate actionable takeaways from Shoe Dog for the person listening to this right now?
Synthesizing all of our sources, I think lesson 1 draws directly from that Hawaiian boiler room experience. Belief is irresistible.
Knight was a terrible encyclopedia salesman because he simply didn't care about the product.
But he could sell shoes out of his car trunk to total strangers because he possessed a cellular, unshakable conviction that running made people better and that his shoes made running better.
You cannot fake that kind of authentic passion. When you truly believe in what you are doing, you don't have to sell at all. People are magnetically drawn to your conviction.
That is so true. Lesson 2 is my absolute favorite, and it applies to every facet of life. The art of competing is the art of forgetting.
Think about Knight's journey. You have to forget your perceived limits. You have to forget your past failures.
You have to forget the very rational fact that your competitor is a giant, heavily funded German conglomerate, or that the federal government is trying to tax you out of existence.
As Knight famously put it, somebody may beat me, but they're going to have to bleed to do it.
You have to cultivate an intentional amnesia for all the logical reasons why you supposedly cannot succeed.
And finally, lesson 3 is Knight's ultimate parting advice to the next generation. Seek a calling, not a career.
A career is simply what you do to pay your bills. A calling is what you do because you cannot imagine your life without it.
Knight advises young people not to settle for the respectable path if it makes them miserable. Life is going to be filled with exhausting work, so you must find a way to make your work feel like play.
If the fatigue you feel at the end of the day feels purposeful, then the inevitable disappointments just become fuel for the next morning.
So bring it all together. Phenomenal success is rarely the tidy 5-step checklist we see neatly packaged in magazines, and it certainly isn't that pristine glass case in the high-end retail store.
The reality of building something great is a messy, perilous, terrifying journey.
It is about failing upwards, surviving by the absolute skin of your teeth, trusting your gut when the financial spreadsheets are screaming at you to quit, and relying entirely on the passionate misfits who share your vision.
Exactly. The true legacy of Nike is the mud on the shoes, not the polish. Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over.
It is drawn directly from the philosophy of Bill Bowerman, Knight's intimidating old track coach, capturing the pioneer spirit of the Oregon Trail that influenced the company's DNA.
The cowards never started, and the weak died along the way. That leaves us.
That quote gives me absolute chills, and it brings this entire story right to your doorstep.
Imagine you're sitting there right now. You likely have a crazy idea of your own sitting in the back of your mind.
Maybe it's a business you want to start. Maybe it's a piece of art you want to create. Maybe it's a completely new way of living your life that terrifies your family.
Given that life is incredibly short, as fleeting as that exuberant half second before a race is decided, what exactly are you waiting for to take that first step?
The starting line is always right in front of you.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Shoe Dog.
We hope exploring this messy, chaotic origin story sparks something real for you. Keep exploring, keep running, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.